Jack Nicholson, a name that once struck awe into anyone who revered cinema. A force that blazed across the silver screen like a lightning bolt, unpredictable and electrifying. His voice, his presence, his madness, each performance etched into the memories of generations. He wasn't simply an actor. He was cinema incarnate. From The Shining's haunted hotel corridors to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest rebellion against the system. From the dark humor of Batman to the fragile humanity of As Good as It Gets. Jack redefined what it meant to be a performer. He didn't merely portray characters. He became them. And yet today, at 88 years old, the storm has quieted. The man who once towered over Hollywood now retreats into a life of near silence, hidden from the public eye, casting a long and melancholic shadow. His retreat is not just a chapter of aging. It is a heartbreaking reflection of how even the fiercest legends must eventually yield to time. Whispers surround him now, whispers of memory loss, of a body no longer able to carry the fire it once held. But long before the silence settled in, Jack Nicholson lived a life filled with intensity, brilliance, and shadows that followed him relentlessly. His story is one of triumph, but it is also one of aching solitude. It is not only a chronicle of Hollywood greatness, but a deeply human tale of longing, identity, love lost, and the toll of genius. He was born John Joseph Nicholson in April of 1937 in Neptune, New Jersey, a town as far from the glamour of Hollywood as you could imagine. But his entrance into the world wasn't ordinary. It was cloaked in secrecy and deception. The woman he believed to be his sister was actually his mother, a teenage dancer named June. His grandparents, in an effort to avoid scandal, raised him as their own. It wasn't until he was nearly 40 years old that he discovered the truth in an article written by Time magazine. This was not a revelation. It was a collapse. The foundation of everything he believed about his identity crumbled in an instant. The silence of his mother, the abandonment by his father, the years spent building a false narrative, it all came crashing down. And yet, as he always did, Jack turned that pain into something extraordinary, into performances that bled authenticity, into eyes that burned with questions he never truly answered. Who am I? Where do I come from? That haunted child lived inside every role he played. As the wounds of his past shaped his art, Jack found himself chasing something deeper than stardom. He sought meaning. He sought connection. And in the mid-1950s, still just a teenager, he made his way to California. Not with a red carpet waiting, but with nothing more than dreams and determination. He started humbly, as an office boy at Hanna-Barbera Studios, delivering scripts and running errands. But even then, he knew he was meant for more. At 21, he finally landed his first role in Cry Baby Killer, a low-budget film that few remember today. But for Jack, it was proof that the dream was real. From there, he endured years of near anonymity, working with director Roger Corman on films shot in days with shoestring budgets. It wasn't glamorous, but it was vital. He learned to improvise, to adapt, to summon emotion from thin air. It was in those forgotten backlots that the craft of Jack Nicholson was forged. And then came Easy Rider. In 1969, with that one performance, everything changed. His chaotic charisma electrified the screen, captivating an audience that was hungry for rebellion. The boy who once carried coffee now carried the future of American cinema on his shoulders. It was ignition, an explosion that would launch him into superstardom. But even as his star rose, the ghosts of his childhood never faded. That same pain and confusion, that unresolved sorrow, gave his characters their complexity. It made them real. It made them unforgettable. Following the breakout success of Easy Rider, Jack Nicholson became more than an actor. He became a cultural force. His next performances would not only cement his status as one of the greatest of his generation, but would also reflect a man shaped by emotional fractures no one else could fully see. In 1970, Nicholson starred in 5 Easy Pieces, a role that revealed his unmatched ability to express internal turmoil. That performance earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. But it was far more than an accolade. It was a confession. The character, like Jack himself, was a man searching for meaning in a world that never quite gave him a clear place. The momentum built quickly. Just a few years later, in 1973's The Last Detail, he delivered another searing performance, channeling rage, humor, and heartbreak with equal precision. And then came the film that would forever carve his name into cinematic history, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In 1975, as Randall McMurphy, Jack didn't just act. He embodied rebellion itself. It was a portrayal so powerful, so layered, that audiences were left breathless. He wasn't playing a man fighting the system. He was fighting it. His pain, his fire. But even at the height of fame, Jack remained a man shaped by solitude. He gave the world unforgettable art, but in return, he carried deep emotional costs. Behind the charm and wit, he was still the boy wondering why the woman he called sister had vanished. Still the son without a father. Still the man who turned every unanswered question into another scene, another character, another storm. And then, at the age of 60, he gave audiences one of his most nuanced, vulnerable performances in As Good as It Gets. His portrayal of Melvin Udall, a man battling internal darkness while yearning for connection, earned him a third Academy Award. But the role also stripped away the myth of Nicholson the Invincible. It revealed something deeper and quietly fearful of what the future would bring. While Jack Nicholson's career burned like a comet across the sky, his private life unfolded in a far more complicated and fragile way. But that hope was fleeting. As his ambition exploded and the demands of his career became relentless, Jack struggled to balance the domestic with the artistic. Had he let go of his only real chance at a normal life? He admitted years later that walking away from Sandra and Jennifer had left him with a deep sense of unresolved sorrow. In that confession, rare and stripped of bravado, we glimpsed the human cost of his greatness. Yet the heartbreaks didn't end there. In 1970, amid his meteoric rise following 5 Easy Pieces, Nicholson began a brief romance with actress Susan Ansbach. It was a relationship that would give rise to a son, Caleb, though Jack did not initially acknowledge him. Whether out of fear, distraction, or the consuming demands of his career, Nicholson remained distant. It wasn't until many years later that he offered financial support and a quiet kind of recognition. Though the early absence remained a scar, this chapter of his life is soaked in irony. Jack, who had spent his youth believing his mother was his sister and grappling with the ache of abandonment, had now unintentionally passed on that same confusion to his own child. He had repeated the very wound that defined him. It wasn't a scandal, but a tragedy of inheritance, one carried in silence. Then came Michelle Phillips. In the mid-1970s, Jack entered a brief and intense relationship with the luminous singer from the Mamas and the Papas. Their connection was fleeting, but profoundly emotional. When Michelle became pregnant, it appeared as though Jack might once again face the chance to become a father. But the pregnancy ended in heartbreak, a private loss, never played out before paparazzi or studio cameras, but endured in the quiet corners of their lives. For Michelle, it was a grief too deep for words. For Jack, it was yet another fracture in the fragile dream of family that always seemed to slip through his fingers. And yet, amidst this series of romantic storms, one name rises above all the others: Anjelica Huston. From 1973 to 1990, she was Jack's partner in every sense of the word. Not just a girlfriend or a fleeting flame, but his match, the daughter of legendary director John Huston. She was formidable, elegant, and deeply intelligent. She didn't fall for Jack's charm, she saw through it. And in return, he gave her a side of himself that few others had ever witnessed: vulnerable. When Jack Nicholson's long and volatile relationship with Anjelica Huston collapsed, it marked the end of a chapter that had once held the potential for something lasting, something redemptive. But the story did not end there. In the aftermath of heartbreak, Nicholson sought a second chance at family. and for a brief moment, it appeared he might find it. Jack became a father once again. Their daughter, Lorraine, was born. 2 years later, their son, Ray, followed. These moments could have been the quiet redemption of his life. A chance to finally become the father he'd once failed to be, to build the home he never had growing up. And in some ways, Jack embraced that role. He spoke of his children with pride. No scandalous headlines, just the soft departure of another woman and the quiet realization that Jack had once again let a family slip through his fingers. And yet, this loss was different. He had children now, living, breathing reminders of love, of legacy, of the life he might still hold on to. He remained connected to Lorraine and Ray, attending events with them, celebrating their milestones, even sharing courtside seats at Lakers games. These were not grand gestures, but small moments that showed his desire, however imperfect, to remain part of their world. Still, for a man who had built an empire on charisma, intimacy remained elusive. As the years rolled on, Nicholson entered a period of romantic detachment, marked more by fleeting affairs than deep connection. In the mid to late 1990s, he was briefly linked to supermodel Kate Moss, though their bond flickered out almost as quickly as it began. Around the same time, he began an on-and-off relationship with Twin Peaks star Lara Flynn Boyle. Their connection was intense and unpredictable, marked more by spectacle than stability. The media had a field day, but behind the headlines, Jack was still the same man, searching, unsatisfied, and unwilling to change. Later came actress Paz de la Huerta, another chapter in a string of brief encounters. With each new relationship, the world whispered about Jack's legend, about his seemingly endless charm. But those who looked closer saw something else. A pattern of loneliness, a carousel of companions who never stayed, a series of embraces that ended in silence. Even the public began to notice that these romances no longer carried the same weight. They weren't stories of a man in love. They were echoes of someone trying to hold on to a fire that had long since begun to dim. Jack Nicholson, the eternal rebel of Hollywood, the man who could command a room with a glance, was slowly becoming a figure of solitude. Perhaps the most haunting truth of all is that among the many women who passed through his life, the one who left the deepest scar, the one he never seemed to move beyond, was Angelica Houston. Their relationship had been more than a love affair. It was the closest he ever came to a partnership rooted in both fire and faith. And once it was gone, something inside him quietly shifted. He once confessed that losing her was a wound that never closed, that no other woman could fill the void she left behind, that even with all the fame, fortune, and flings, he had lost the one soul who truly understood him. It's easy to look at Jack's love life and see a man driven by appetite, but it's far more truthful and far more tragic to see a man desperate for something he never fully believed he deserved. Stability, devotion, a home. Each woman who entered his orbit gave him a glimpse of what might have been, but each departure reinforced the ache of what never was. As the 21st century unfolded, Jack Nicholson began to retreat from the stage that had once defined him. The man whose grin had once mesmerized audiences, who had once stared down the camera with unmatched intensity, began appearing less and less. The red carpets became rare. The late-night interviews vanished. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Jack, the storm, the rebel, the firebrand, began to fade into the shadows. By 2010, there were already whispers. He had not acted in a major film since How Do You Know? A romantic comedy that felt more like a soft landing than a farewell. But there was no grand announcement, no retirement tour, no final bow to the audiences who had worshipped him for decades. Just a quiet vanishing. One day, he was the most magnetic presence in cinema. The next, he was gone. The silence was unsettling. And as years passed without a new role, rumors took root. Some said it was his choice, that he had simply lost interest in acting. Others murmured about memory loss, about a man once known for mastering entire scripts, now struggling to remember names, faces, even conversations. Friends, speaking carefully, revealed that Jack's legendary sharpness had begun to dim, that the charisma was still there, but it flickered, no longer the roaring blaze it once was. In 2017, fellow actor and friend Peter Fonda confirmed what many had already suspected. Jack had quietly retired from acting, but the public still hoped he might return for one last unforgettable performance, one final eruption of brilliance. That hope would never come. In 2023, rare paparazzi photographs emerged, images that shocked the world. Jack was seen on the balcony of his Mulholland Drive mansion, wearing a faded orange shirt, his hair unkempt, his frame noticeably frilier. The man who once dominated every room now seemed lost in thought, distant, detached. For fans who had grown up idolizing his every role, the photos were a painful reminder. Even legends age. Even giants fall quiet. But what was perhaps more heartbreaking than the physical decline was the emotional solitude that had crept into his life. Nicholson, who had once been surrounded by friends, lovers, artists, and admirers, was now mostly alone. He no longer appeared at public events. He no longer attended premieres. Even his famous courtside seats at Lakers games, his signature presence for decades, were left empty for long stretches of time. He was not forgotten by the world, but in many ways it seemed the world had become a place from which he had quietly withdrawn. Inside his mansion, Jack was still surrounded by the symbols of his extraordinary life. Artworks by masters like Picasso and Matisse, sculptures by Rodin, a car collection that spoke of taste and luxury. His net worth was estimated at nearly $400 million. The properties he owned, from Los Angeles to Hawaii, were the trappings of a man who had once possessed everything. And yet, the most valuable currency in Jack Nicholson's twilight years was not fame, or wealth, or acclaim. It was connection, the very thing he had so often struggled to sustain. He had 6 children by 5 women, but none of them lived with him. The woman he once called the love of his life was long gone. His house, filled with beautiful things, echoed with emptiness. The irony is sharp and cruel. For a man whose every expression once captivated millions, whose voice once echoed across the grandest stages, the greatest sound that now surrounded him was silence. Not the comforting silence of peace, but the heavy, hollow kind, the silence of absence. And yet, even as he faced the slow erosion of memory, as the sharpness of thought began to blur and bend, there remained something eternal, something unshakable. Jack Nicholson had not been erased. He had not vanished. His presence still lingered, in every film, in every quote, in every whisper of "Here's Johnny," from a generation who grew up both terrified and enchanted by his madness. To measure Nicholson by the decline alone would be a mistake, because decline, though inevitable, does not erase the fire that once burned. And for Jack, that fire had changed the course of cinema itself. It would be easy, and perhaps even comforting, to define Jack Nicholson's story by its twilight, by the fading light of a once blazing star. But to do so would miss the extraordinary truth of what he left behind. Even as the man himself disappeared from view, his legacy grew larger, more eternal, shaping not only the history of film, but the emotional fabric of everyone who ever watched him perform. Jack Nicholson wasn't simply a Hollywood success. He was a cultural phenomenon, a vessel of raw emotion and fearless artistry. He took characters that were flawed, chaotic, even terrifying, and made them human. He gave voice to the wounded, the rebellious, the misunderstood. Whether he was smashing through a door with a fire axe or whispering quiet confessions of longing, there was always a flicker of truth in his eyes, a truth that audiences recognized, even if they couldn't explain it. This is why his films endure, why his performances still echo across generations. Because they were more than entertainment. They were reflections of what it means to be alive, to be broken, to be human. Beyond the screen, Jack's passion for art continued. He didn't just collect masterpieces to decorate his walls. He studied them. He cherished them. His collection, valued at over $150 million, wasn't about wealth. It was about beauty, about capturing something timeless. In this, too, he revealed a side of himself that few saw, a man who was endlessly searching, not for applause, but for meaning. And while Jack often avoided the spotlight in his later years, he was quietly generous. He supported causes that touched lives, from AIDS research and diabetes foundations to programs for at-risk children and police support organizations. He rarely sought recognition for these efforts. In fact, many of them only came to light through others' accounts. But they spoke to something deeper in him, a desire to give back, to do good, to contribute in ways beyond performance. His children, especially Lorraine and Ray, remained his tether to the world. They were the bright spots in the quiet hours, the names he carried not just on paper, but in pride. While he may not have built a conventional family, he never stopped loving them. That love, however imperfect, was real. And in the stillness of his later life, it may have been the one thing that offered him peace. There is a haunting poetry in Jack Nicholson's final act. In the silence of his secluded home on Mulholland Drive, posture stooped, are difficult for many to process. They contrast so deeply with the versions burned into our minds. The rebel with the wicked grin, the haunted writer at the Overlook Hotel, the man who could command a room without uttering a word. But time, in its quiet cruelty, takes from us all. It dulls the sharpest minds, slows the strongest bodies, and steals even the voices that once roared the loudest. For Jack, whose very soul was shaped by sound, expression, and presence, this gradual withdrawal from the world is not simply aging. It is a kind of disappearance, a slow fading of a man who once lit the screen with fire and now lives in the hush of solitude. Still, to measure his life by these final years would be a disservice to everything he achieved, everything he overcame, and everything he gave. Jack Nicholson's journey wasn't defined by decline. It was elevated by resilience. It was a life of contradictions, wild yet reflective, indulgent yet wounded, distant yet desperately human. And it was precisely in that contradiction that his genius thrived. He never pretended to be perfect. He never masked his vices behind false humility. He admitted his regrets. They live on in every aspiring actor who dares to dig deeper, in every audience member who watches One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and feels something shift inside.